There are always mysteries in life. I want you to believe in things you cannot. Van Helsing, Dracula, Bram Stoker. Well, everybody, welcome back.
Hey, everyone.
I'm Logan.
And I'm Nicole.
And this is Generation X Paranormal. So we had an interesting day today as far as weather's concerned.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, but at the time of recording, well, I know when this will come out, but at the time of recording, we had what I would imagine probably going to be an F3 tornado come through our area. So it was a bit of a harrowing day.
Yes, it was.
It's been one of those days.
Woke up to tornado sirens.
Yeah, I had already been up and we had taken the dogs out, or I had anyway. And then, the tornado siren goes off and I'm like, well, guess I got to wake Nicole up. So
I was already awake.
Yep, that was our morning. So hopefully your morning was better, but I know what is better, and that's going to be this episode.
Yes.
And we get to talk about, honestly, one of our favorites. And I don't know why we've officially not done one up to this point, but I'm glad we waited.
Yes.
Because we have Rissa Miller on with us.
Yeah.
And as a Generation X Paranormal resident historian, she brings it.
She does every time. Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, what can you tell us about what Rissa's going to be talking about?
So this episode will be coming out the Wednesday before May 26th, which is World Dracula Day.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Which Dracula, of course, represents vampires. But specifically, Dracula is from a novel.
That's right.
From Bram Stoker.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to she's going to get into the vampire lore, but we're also going to kind of focus on Bram Stoker and his novel and how that led to how we see vampires today and see Dracula today.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, let's get in. Oh,
speaking of,
yeah,
show my copy of Bram Stoker's
there it is,
Dracula
in all its glory. And if you're listening,
pretty good one.
Yeah, if you're listening on the podcast, it is a very cool.
The castle.
It's got the castle in it, and then of course it's got the gold binding.
Mm-hmm.
It is very nice.
Yes, it is.
Well. Anyway, we're excited to talk to Rissa. So yeah, let's bring her on. Yeah. Hey, Rissa, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Logan? Nicole?
I'm doing good.
Doing really good. Glad to have our resident historian back in. As we've said many times, you're definitely a crowd favorite. I think most people generally gravitate to everything that you talk about. So we're pretty excited to have you back on.
Well, I'm super excited to be back, and I'm super excited for what we're talking about tonight.
Yes.
As I mentioned, we were getting ready. This is this topic I've been waiting for years to talk about. So
yes,
perfect.
Yeah, and we're pretty big fans, of course. And I'm sure we'll dive into it more. But being a Generation X kid and being from that era, we had some amazing movies and different different things that we got to enjoy as kids. And I guess I just don't see as many of them nowadays, but they've definitely changed. And of course, we're talking about vampires. My vampire is kind of somewhere sandwiched in between the Lestat and a little bit of everybody got to know Lost Boys. I mean, that's kind of
Yes.
I'm somewhere stuck between that, and I'm looking for David and Lestat. And of course, every 5 seconds, someone going, Michael. But no, this is exciting. I can't wait to talk about it. So yeah, I know you got a lot to talk about, so let's kind of.
I do. And, I'm going to make a confession. When I finished my first set of notes for this talk and I practiced reading them. They were 2.5 hours long. No, I did cut it. I did cut it. I would not subject you to that. But this is a really, really, really rich topic. And
Yes.
just to be clear, there's literally no way in one podcast that we're going to cover all of vampire lore. Like, honestly, this could be a whole semester's worth of a class at a college level. I might be able to cover some of the creature's history and then get into our main theme, which is Dracula tonight. World Dracula Day is May 26th. It celebrates the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which happened in 1897. And whether or not you realize it, every vampire you recognize as a vampire, you recognize that vampire because of Dracula. And Stoker really changed vampire lore forever with this book. So that said, I mean, he was not the first vampire by a long shot.
Right.
Dracula had a lot of forerunners, some very, very ancient, some that were just right beforehand. So we'll talk about them all. Well, we'll talk about many of them. But if you have listeners who are out there like, oh, I have this favorite vampire story from, this part of history, hopefully I hit it and not realize that my original version of this was more than twice this length, and that still didn't cover everything.
Yeah.
All of that said, I really tried to pick the highlights and the things that were most relevant to the Dracula story in specific.
Perfect. And that is the Dracula or the vampire that I know the best, I guess, definitely.
Oh, I think all of us do.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's kick it off.
All right. So vampires before Dracula. This is a lovely mythical and bloody timeline. Let's go to Greece first. The Lamia was a child-devouring demoness who would seduce young men and drink their blood. Allegedly, after she had a little, love affair with Zeus, Hera cursed her. And she kind of became a sort of a catch-all figure for dangerous, seductive women. And you're going to see that theme running throughout our conversation tonight. Dangerous, seductive women.
Interesting.
Still a problem, I guess. Problem
Always.
then, problem
Always.
now. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, some
So-
stuff's universal.
Yeah, absolutely. You just got to be
Mhm.
careful for those dangerous, seductive women. So still in Greece, we're going to talk next very briefly about the Empusa. They are shape-shifting spirits. And again, the shape-shifting story is part of Dracula too. And they can drink blood or consume flesh and were used to frighten children and warn against promiscuity. Let's head to Rome for the Strix. These were owl-like nocturnal creatures that would typically only feed on the blood of infants. And they weren't technically vampires, but kind of. They were
Sure.
vampiric. Kind of like a chupacabra is vampiric.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Bloodlust type stuff.
Right. And
Mhm.
so the word Strix eventually becomes the forerunner of the Romanian folklore strigolai word. And you know what? There's a lot of words that you two are going to hear me stagger over tonight.
Okay.
I'm
That's
going to do
okay.
my best. I am trying to pronounce some of these words, and if I get them wrong, if you know the correct way, correct me. And if not, dear listeners from Gen X Paranormal, please know I'm doing my best.
They know.
They know.
So then in Norse mythology, we have the Bearwites, also called the Dragur. Dragur? Yeah. There were undead warriors who guarded tombs and would sometimes physically attack the living. Now, they had some different magical properties. Besides the lingering stench of death, they could also
Jeez.
appear in your dreams, control the weather, and grow to enormous sizes. So they're sort of like a different kind of monster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
It's like it's like a big, tall, stinky weatherman.
right? Just like that.
Yeah,
And of course, we have to mention the incubus and succubus.
Mhm.
And these were male and female demons who are seductive and drain humans during sleep. So they were most popular in early medieval lore, but their roots reach all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia. And they are believed to steal your vitality, to cause nightmares. There's that dream aspect again. And they could even produce offspring. They are strictly predatory, they're deeply sexual, and they're definitely part of the vampire story. Um, they give this idea that they are a nocturnal seducer who feeds on both blood and life force. Now later, because incubus and succubus are sort of like experiences that people believe they've had, science has told us that this is linked to sleep paralysis.
Okay.
That when you experience sleep paralysis, there's often a sleep paralysis demon that will sit on your body and cause you to believe they are real. And this is all an effect of the mind. This sort of
Okay.
hallucination. It feels very
Right.
vivid. It's never happened to me. I've never had sleep paralysis or experienced a sleep paralysis demon. But there is actually a lot of scientific data about that phenomenon.
Yeah, I've heard that before. I mean, there's something definitely that happens when you're paralyzed with like that. I've known people as a medic when I was in the army
Uh-huh.
that would come in saying they had sleep paralysis, and they would often talk about these crazy like hallucinations and different things that would happen. So, yeah, I've definitely run across that before.
Well, you know, another common figure in the sleep paralysis like pantheon is the cat. So,
Yeah.
like that people imagine there's a cat on them and perhaps even stealing their breath, which kind of lends itself to yet another trope. So
Mhm.
the cat stealing
Interesting.
your breath thing, which
Yeah.
Yeah.
they don't really do.
No,
But
No.
if we've owned a few, and if they had, I'm pretty sure we'd be goners right now.
yeah. So those are the really ancient vampires I decided to include. Now we're going to get into the pre-18th century European vampires. This is a very specific niche, and they are not sexy. They are not romantic. They are not elegant. They are mostly going to be reanimated corpses that
Ew.
are ugly, bloated, and bloodstained. And they have returned specifically to spread death, disease, and misfortune, not
Hmm.
to be seductive or charming. So,
Wonderful.
the common
Mm.
traits of these early European folklore vampires are a bloated body. This is from decomposition gases. And if you've ever
Mhm.
seen, this is a horrible mental picture. If you've ever seen like a roadkill that's all puffed up and bloated,
Yeah.
Mhm.
that's what I'm talking about.
Sure.
But people thought that they were they didn't know about decomposition gases back then, and they thought that they were full of blood. That was from like
Yeah.
this like really gluttonous blood
Hmm.
consumption. That they were like poofed up like that, full of blood.
Okay. Yeah, that
Um,
logic checks out. Yeah.
Yeah.
so yeah, there's a method to the madness here.
Sure.
Mhm.
So next, they would have purple or dark skin. They wouldn't be pale, but people believed they were just engorged with blood. There would often be blood at their mouth, and this was considered proof of nocturnal feeding on other creatures. The groaning noises from the grave. Now we know now that was probably trapped gases escaping from the
Right.
decomposing bodies.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Um, they were allegedly rise from the grave at night. Sometimes they walked, and sometimes they would fly. This is a lot based on local legends. And then the chewing of their shrouds. Apparently, they would gnaw at their own clothing or even their own fingers or limbs. And of course, that night they would go out and cause death among the living. This could be by spreading disease, causing nightmares. I mean, just what I've described could already cause a nightmare for you.
Oh, yes.
Just
Um,
slightly.
yeah, or just literally by like draining the life force, kind of in the same way that, the incubus and succubus would do.
Mhm.
Now, there are lots of ways that you might become one of these vampires, and they sort of fall into the idea of a good or a bad death. And that's a huge rabbit hole I'm not going to plunge into.
Sure.
But a bad death could be suicide, murder, an unbaptized person, or even an unbaptized baby. That is considered a bad death. An unclean death, meaning that you died without last rites being administered. And
Huh.
of course, if you were a witch or a sorcerer, you were going to have a bad death. Absolutely. Um, Sometimes people were born with deformities or even especially bad teeth, and they would assume that they were somehow cursed, and that could be a
Mm.
person who was going to have a bad death. And of course, the seventh son of a seventh son. Now, that plays back into werewolf lore a little bit as
Mhm.
well, but also into this idea of a bad death. So, if anybody died in any of these highly suspect ways, villagers are probably going to check it out and like maybe dig them back up, make sure they're
Yeah.
not a
Right.
vampire.
Mhm.
Now, there are specific ways they would deal with these miscreant vampires. Beheading, very effective. You remove the
I'd say.
head, and it takes away the power of the vampire to rise. Burning the body, like total destruction, burned to ashes. This was a little different. You could stuff the vampire's mouth with stones, bricks, coins, or straw, or any combination thereof. This prevents them from biting other people and passing their vampire infection on.
Interesting.
Huh.
Never heard that. Putting
I haven't
coins in
heard
their
that
mouth?
one.
So
No.
they would be buried with coins in their mouth.
Or they would exhume them and then do it.
Oh, okay. I follow you now. Gotcha.
Stuff it full of straw.
Yeah.
Right.
That's weird.
You
That's
know,
a
First of
weird
all,
one.
just think about having to be the person to do that task.
See-
Wait a minute, you want me to do what now?
This is my job.
Yes, this is what I do. If I fill out a
Yeah.
W-2, shove straw in dead corpses.
you know,
Yeah.
there might be worse jobs out there, but I can't think of one right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're out there, I'm
Especially because
sure.
you got to put into perspective that, I mean, embalming goes all the way back to the Egyptians, but it wasn't common.
Mhm.
These were
Yeah.
not embalmed bodies. These were just bodies that were rotting
Mhm.
away.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm sure that the aroma was,
Oof.
noticeable.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So
no doubt.
other
Ugh.
things they could do. The body would be placed face down in the ground, so that when
Okay.
they woke up and started digging to get out, they would dig further into the ground and they wouldn't be able to get out. This was something also done to witches, and I think we talked about that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Mhm.
You could place, now this is kind of funny. Once you know someone's going to have a vampire tendency, you could leave a whole bunch of knots or netting or a whole bunch of random seeds in their grave. Because
Hmm.
for whatever reason, the lore is that the vampire would compulsively want to untangle or count things, and it would absolutely befuddle them and it would delay their return. And now, if you think back to when we talked about Christmas monsters, the
Yeah.
Calicantaros could be
Yes.
Mhm.
confused. They were vampiric. They could be confused by a colander and by counting all the holes on the colander,
Interesting.
right?
Mhm.
I gotta admit though, when you said that, I kept thinking of the Count on what was it,
Count
Sesame
tri-
Street?
Sesame
Oh,
Street.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
yeah.
wonder if that's
Yeah, I
why.
know.
That's
Go
a great
figure.
question. I don't know the
Yeah.
answer to that question, but that's a good observation because he was into math, right?
He sure was.
Yes.
He would count everything.
That's
He was into
interesting.
math. So,
Hmm.
the other thing, of course, and you know this one, would be to drive a wooden stake through the body. Now, they historically used wood from a hawthorn or an ash tree. And the idea wasn't so much as to pierce the heart as it was to pin the body to the ground initially.
Okay.
Okay.
Another thing this is other lore, and we're going to talk about this subject later, but you could bury the body at a crossroads. And so if you put a body at a crossroads, it was at a liminal space, and even if they got out, they would be confused as to where they were. They wouldn't be able to find their way,
Interesting.
in theory.
Hmm.
So these customs show up throughout Europe and into the Mediterranean, and some of them, as you know, continue to influence vampire stories today.
Absolutely.
And, I was really curious as I was reading some of this. I'm like, why did all of these legends arrive? Because some of them seem so random.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so,
Well, what's interesting is the stake.
yeah.
For some reason, I never put that together. The term of it, nobody says, stab them in the heart with a wooden, a piece of wood. They actually call it a stake. And a stake
Mhm.
sticks something to the ground.
Yeah.
I don't know why I never put that together. Go figure.
So, I think the biggest reason a lot of these legends happen is because they didn't really understand the science of decomposition yet. Before we hit the ages, the age of enlightenment, and we had the scientific method, society just simply didn't understand that there would be bloating and like blood seepage, and your hair and nails do continue to grow if you're not embalmed. That's like a totally normal, natural thing. But they were very suspect and honestly a little creepy to folks back then, and they just didn't understand that this was all part of the normal process.
Right.
So then another reason is disease and plague. They did not
Mhm.
understand that viruses and bacteria, they spread, they're airborne or they're, through touch or whatever. So when these different diseases would strike villages or even larger towns, it seemed logical that the dead might be infecting the living.
Yep. That would make great sense.
Yeah, it would.
Right. And then, of course, there are dreams and sleep paralysis. We've already talked about that a little bit, but a lot of people interpret these kinds of dreams as vampire attacks. And going way back in time again, sleep paralysis is real. It's a scientific thing. And we've always had it as humans. So people just didn't understand that that's what it was yet.
Interesting.
So the other interesting thing is that as Christianity starts to spread across Europe, folklore mix with these new ideas.
Right.
And then there's also this idea about sin and damnation, and the resurrections are people who've gone terribly wrong in the eyes of the Christian church. And there's a lot of words, too, that came before vampire. Of course, I would say revenant is probably the coolest, right?
Revenant. Yeah.
Revenant.
That
The
is really
revenant,
cool.
meaning those who return. Now, revenants are interesting because they can be like physical beings or spirits. But either
Okay.
way, they've come to like drain you of your life force, and they're somebody returned from the dead. But revenant is also a type of ghost, historically speaking. And then we have, and now some of these I might say wrong. I'm just going to say it right now. I'm going to try.
You're
I'm
you're
doing my
good.
best here.
We understand.
Do
Believe
your best.
Yep. The Strigoi, the Romanian, they can also be living witches that leave their body to drink blood, or actual vampires who return from the dead. The Nosferatu. Now, this is not to
Oh,
be
yeah.
confused with the 1922 film,
Right.
but this is a Romanian word for plague bearer or insufferable, and it has Slavic roots.
Interesting.
I'm going to try to say this Greek word, and forgive me, I'm going to get it wrong. Raikolakolax. That is the walking dead who roam the night and will actually knock on your door. Very polite.
Very polite.
Yeah,
Jeez.
it's really very polite. Now, you only get attacked by them if you answer.
Sharkogram.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So,
Hmm.
I mean, honestly, I hate answering the door anyway, but now I really don't want
Yeah.
to.
Basically, like they have to invite them in. I've
Right.
heard that
That's
before
it.
with their legends.
go.
Yeah, you have to be invited in.
There you go.
You'd almost have to have a ring camera for
A
your
ring camera,
house.
yeah.
But
Like,
You're like,
oh my
"Who are you?"
gosh, is there some undead person at the door
Yeah,
again?
right. Exactly. Nope,
Just
just
let them go
UPS.
away.
Oh man.
So then, again from the Slavic comes Upir or vampire, and we know this one. These are the vampires that rise from the grave and attack entire villages. And then finally, from Western Europe, we get the, I'm going to say this wrong too. I'm going to give it a shot. Nacheher. This is a
Yeah.
chewing corpse that likes to devour bodies. Like a corpse
Yeah.
that comes back to eat and chew on bodies. Logan, your face is priceless right now.
Well, I'm thinking about, it's bad enough you got to worry about them sucking your blood. Now they're just gonna masticate all over you, and it just
Yes,
Oh.
Yeah,
yes,
that's pretty gross.
that's a thing that you had to be concerned about, historically speaking. The undead masticating
the
on your body.
crazy, the
Just don't
crazy
answer the
succubuses
door.
of those times. Give me a ring doorbell, and we'll be fine.
So, some big takeaways here is that these were monstrous creatures. Every
Sure.
single one of them were actually monsters. They were beasts. They were frightening. They were literal threats to the living, and they were often tied to disease and plague. So there's nothing sexy, charming, sparkling, or any otherwise to do with these vampires.
All right.
Yeah,
Yes.
the magic is all dark. Let's be
Yeah.
clear.
Yep.
This is truly the stuff of nightmares.
Right.
And when I went looking for old paintings, I didn't come up with much. It seems that nobody really wanted to paint these things. I don't know why. Yeah,
Well, a big bloated thing walking down. I mean,
yeah,
what
bloated
are you
dead
really
corpse
painting
walking
there?
around eating people. No, I didn't find it. Doesn't it sound a little bit like the zombie story?
Well, I was thinking
It
about
does,
that,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
especially you said The Walking Dead. Now, of course, everybody knows what that is,
Right.
but it's interesting that it almost has that the same parallel as zombies kind of in the beginning.
Yes.
If you
Yeah.
took out just the bloodlust part of it, like if you were to somehow eliminate that part of it, it's really not necessarily vampiric. We're really just talking about
A
a zombie.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah,
Right.
for sure.
Well, now we're going to arrive in the 1700s. And the first thing I'd like to do is dip into 2 actual cases of vampire attack.
Cool.
First, I'm going to say this man's name wrong. I'm going to try. The first case is Peter Balgochevek. This is one of the earliest and most famous documented vampire incidents. It happened in a village in what is now Serbia during the Habsburg Austrian Empire in 1725. And this sort of helped create what would become a vampire hysteria that swept through Europe. So Peter dies at 62, which is a good old age at that point.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then 9 people in the village die within the next 8 days. They all suddenly fall ill, and they all report that Peter visited them in the night and strangled them in their sleep. So, of course, a panic sweeps through the village, and the authorities get involved. And people are like, I'm not going to live here unless you do something about this. So a military surgeon, a priest, and some officials reluctantly exhume Peter's body. And what they find is that he is perfectly preserved, despite being dead for over a week. There's fresh blood around his mouth. His nails have grown. He has rosy skin. His eyes are open. And the villagers are like, yep, we're 100% sure that Peter is a vampire.
Interesting.
Uh-huh. And
That's
so
interesting, actually.
we know, actually, all of this can happen with a natural burial.
Right.
Yes.
Science has taught us that all of this can happen with natural burial. And
Mhm.
also there's the reality that, and I this was part of the research I cut away, that a lot of people were buried alive.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
That was a regular occurrence historically.
I mean, that's
And
the whole birth of graveyard shift, I mean,
oh
to
yeah,
listen to the bell. So,
yep,
yeah.
the bells, so
Mhm.
much there. We could talk about
Yeah.
that for another whole separate
For
episode.
sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But they have a local custom in this part of Serbia to drive the stake through the heart. And they say that when they ran the stake through his heart, he literally screamed and blood poured from his body. So the villagers still didn't feel safe. So they exhume him, burn him into ash, and then throw him back in his grave.
That'll do it.
At that point, he's definitely dead. He's like,
Yeah.
it's like double
Poor
dead,
guy.
right? He's double dead
Yeah,
now.
he's
Double.
double
Yep.
dead.
Wow.
So this case was officially recorded by the Austrian military, and they filed a detailed report. Now, what that means is that this can be published in newspapers all across Europe.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And basically, there's a surge of vampire fears, and people are starting to desecrate graves across the continent.
Why wouldn't they?
Indeed.
Sounds like a good time.
Right? This is known as the first publicized case involving state-sanctioned vampire hunting.
Wow.
Vampire hunters are actually a whole different subject, too. I did cut a bunch of that from this, but it's very interesting stuff,
That sounds interesting.
right?
Some Van Helsing
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Van Helsing.
I imagine we would. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. We cannot skip Van Helsing on this
No,
subject.
that's too important.
Not at all.
So we don't actually know what really happened to Peter in his death, but it could have been a premature burial. It could have just been natural decomposition. But basically, what we do know is that his story helped launch an obsession with vampires. And then right after him came the case of Arnold Paoli. And now he was in a village in Belgrade, or near Belgrade, and he was a former soldier. He had allegedly served in the Ottoman Wars. He returns to his village. He's leading a normal life. But he walks around telling everyone that he was attacked by a vampire during his military service in Greece.
Interesting.
Yeah. So to protect himself, Arnold says that he ate earth from the vampire's grave and smeared himself with the vampire's blood, which I'm not sure how he acquired that. But allegedly, this was a Greek folk remedy against vampirism. Unfortunately, Arnold dies suddenly around 1726 when he falls off of a cart. And I mean, nowadays if we fall off a cart, like whatever, we get back up. But back then, that
Right.
could have been a lethal blow. You know?
Jeez. Man,
Yeah.
you thought enough to worry about vampires, you're going to fall off a cart? And that's how
Right?
you're going to go.
Yeah.
So the first thing that we hear about with Arnold is that people see his ghost wandering at night. This is a revenant, right? And then locals have start to suspect that he's becoming a vampire, that he's going to return in like full physical form to start prey on the living. So they dig him up, and what do they find? They find that he's not decomposing. There's blood around his mouth. His hair and nails are growing. And then, they go in, they stake him in the heart, and they say that he groaned audibly. So, of course, they rip him out of the ground and burn him to ashes as well.
Huh.
But interestingly enough, despite all these measures, deaths continue in his village near Belgrade over the next several months. And the story goes that he had already infected lots of people with the vampire curse before he was exhumed and taken care of. So,
Gotcha.
of course, there's another whole round of bodies being exhumed and even executions that follow his death.
Good
Wow.
Lord.
Right? It's a lot.
Execution.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
All the corpses are also found with like fresh blood, flexible limbs, minimal decay, and staking, decapitation, and burning were all used in this case. So this episode has what they call official documentation. Now that came later in 1732. And it is called the Visum e Repertum, Seen and Discovered. This was a formal report written by a military surgeon named Johann Fluckinger. And he personally examines several of the bodies. He records findings. And then this is published and circulated across Europe.
That's got to scare the crap out of people.
Yes,
Oh,
this
yeah.
provides scientific validation.
Yeah.
Scientific validation that vampires
Shameless.
are real. And
Yeah.
it was taken very seriously by military, by governments, by the church. Like everybody takes this scientific report like to heart.
I mean, at this point, why wouldn't they? I
Of
mean, that's
course
kind
they
of where they've built their entire civilization on,
Mhm.
the advice of people like that. So if they're
Mhm.
saying
We still
vampires are
do. We
real,
still do
right?
today.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly. Yeah, if you get one of the talking heads goes on TV right now, and I'll tread lightly there, and they say there's vampires out, people are going to tend to believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in addition to Peter and Arnold, many different regions start documenting vampire exhumation and rituals, and these are often written down by priests and government officials, people that everyone would have respected at that time. And it's definitely known that Bram Stoker studied these vampire cases when he was researching
Sure.
Dracula.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of that stuff rings true in the story. So
Yeah, absolutely.
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 Mm-mm.
So,
Crazy.
from here, we have a huge vampire hysteria going on throughout Europe. Did you want me to pause because there's a siren behind me?
No, honestly, that is the greatest timing that is totally staying in because you said
like-
there was this craze, and then all of a sudden these sirens.
Sirens go off all around me.
That is serendipity at its finest. Please,
All
yes,
right.
continue.
So, in the 17th century, it's not just about fearing death, it's about fearing that the grave can't hold people. And both the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches become deeply involved in this phenomenon. They issue formal guidance on how to handle vampires. There are exorcisms, they teach people proper Christian burials, and then in extreme cases, they even participate in decapitations and body burning. Then the Eastern Orthodox Church, places like Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, the clergy will work with villagers to, deal with vampires. They will bless graves. They perform rituals to lay the dead to rest. They even authorize destruction of vampires. And the Orthodox tradition has even deeper fears about these creatures, and they're more accepting of the idea that the undead are dangerous and real.
Hmm.
Now, right around this time, we also have the Age of Enlightenment starting. This
Yay.
is a headbutt against
Yeah,
vampires.
I would think so. Sure.
Yeah. The Age of Enlightenment is the beginning of science. It's when the scientific method is born and people really start embracing science over superstition. And in the vampire story, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of intellectuals in Enlightenment times that weigh in on vampires, as well as witches and werewolves. So Voltaire, who everybody's heard of, wrote about
Mhm.
vampires in 1764 in his Philosophical Dictionary. He writes, I'm going to just read it.
Okay.
Vampires were beings who went about at night sucking the blood of the living. Dead bodies were seen with fresh blood in their mouths. In parts of Poland, Hungary, and Moravia, the belief in vampires spread, and the learned even wrote about them. So basically, he's making fun of vampires. He believes they are a thing of human ignorance, and that
Sure.
these people really just need to be more scientific and stop being so ridiculous.
Right. He's definitely got the pinky up as he's drinking his tea,
Yeah.
saying these people are absolutely ridiculous. How dare they?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. It sounds a bit condescending.
It is,
Yeah.
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 Well, I mean, of course, you're in the age of enlightenment, so you're going to have those intellectual types at that point that are,
Oh yes. Oh
yeah, they
yes.
can lean that way.
So another Enlightenment thinker was Dom Augustin Calmet. He was a French Benedictine monk, and he wrote the Treatise on Apparitions of Spirits and Vampires, or Revenants. And this was a serious analysis of vampire reports. He did not deny that vampires existed, but
Oh,
he
really?
suggested there could be natural causes, such as a
Mhm.
disease that causes vampirism. So he didn't really make fun of vampires, but he just said, but we should look for a reason this could happen.
Okay.
Right.
So
That makes sense. Because at this point, we've had some historical references that
Mhm.
this kind of thing was taking place. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
you can't just overlook that. So
Right.
It's
there,
possible. It's
right.
just there's probably an explanation.
Right.
for it.
What medical or what environmental thing is causing it?
Mhm.
So sure,
Right.
I get it.
Right. So why was there so much vampire hysteria at this time in the 1700s? There were real events, and they were fueled by disease, lots of death. They were spread through newspapers, very official reports, the church,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
of course.
And then the Enlightenment thinkers making fun of them actually gives it more fuel.
Of
A-
course. Yeah.
because even if you're giving something negative attention,
It's
it's
still
still
attention.
attention.
Yeah.
Boy, do we
And
know.
yeah, and we go from these local superstitions to like an entire continent sort of embracing the idea of the vampire phenomenon. And it sort of lays the groundwork for the entry into the Gothic, which is right around the corner.
So cool.
So here we are now. We're in Gothic times. We are starting the Victorian era doesn't start till a little later, but more like Edwardian times. And Western Europeans are reading these gruesome reports, and then they begin to romanticize the vampire. They begin to
Mhm.
kind of turn it into an anti-hero. And the original vampire was a monster of a village, to be clear. And it was not like a creature you found in your parlor. But this begins to change. So the very first one that I could find that was sort of notable was The Bride of Corinth. It was a Gothic poem from 1797 by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and is about a young man who meets a ghostly bride and she turns out to be undead. It doesn't work out.
Yeah, you would think. I
It
kind of
doesn't
saw
work
that
out.
one coming.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. It doesn't work
Yeah,
out.
I mean,
Yeah.
go figure.
Yeah. But she speaks very mournfully about being forced into a convent against her will. And the poem sort of ties love into a tragic fate. And there's a lot of sexual repression in it. And they talk a lot about death, obviously. But
Yeah.
this is one of those early female vampiric figures
Oh, okay.
that we're going to see more of.
For sure.
So the next really big piece of Gothic vampire lore is by John Polidori. It's from 1819, and it is The Vampire. This is the first fully realized vampire story in English literature. And it's like a novella, and the character is Lord Ruthven. He is aristocratic. He is calculating and cold-hearted, and he preys on young women in high society. He is a very sophisticated upper-class predator, and he is a huge departure from these like bloated, like zombie-type monsters that
Sure.
we've seen
Mhm.
before.
For sure.
This story was wildly popular. People went crazy for it. And it introduced the idea of the seductive upper-class vampire.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, there's all the tropes right there.
It's like the
Yep.
early Twilight.
Yes,
The early Twilight.
it's like Edward Cullen, but in the
Yes.
1819. Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
So our next...
It is.
It is.
That guy was washing with too much sparkle suds.
So our next important vampire is Varney the vampire, which sounds
Varney.
ridiculous, but Varney is the name. Yes, indeed. He was a penny dreadful, and this is not to be confused with the Showtime series, though
Uh-huh.
that had vampires and it was gothic and very excellent. Varney the vampire was from an actual penny dreadful, which was like a serialized book form that were super cheap and everybody could get them, right?
Okay, yeah.
So he becomes important because his story is long and everybody has access to it because everybody can afford a penny dreadful.
Kind of
So-
like a comic book kind of thing.
Kind of like that,
Yeah,
yes.
a little
kind
bit,
of
sure.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it was first, it was published 1845 to 1847 as a serial form. This is 50 years before Dracula. Now, we don't know if it was written by James Malcolm Rymer or Thomas Becket Prest or both. Scholars have no idea if one or both of them wrote it or if that was, a nom de plume. Like, nobody knows. It's kind of lost to time. But their entire story ran for over 200 chapters and more than
Wow.
667,000 words. To put
Wow.
that, that's a lot. To put
Yeah,
that into
that's insanely
contrast,
I was
Go
gonna
ahead.
say that's insanely prolific for even now.
oh, we would never look at that now. But
No.
Dracula by Bram Stoker was 160,000 words-ish, and a modern horror novel is usually 70 to 100,000 words, and a modern reader will not look at anything longer. A lot of publishers think that, the novella is coming back into style because people have less time and shorter attention spans. So yeah,
Wow.
that is very long. Varney's
Damn.
story was long.
No kidding.
So, Sir Francis Varney was an aristocratic vampire with a mansion, impeccable manners, and a macabre melancholy about him.
Mm.
He was tall, pale, he had sharp teeth, and long fingernails.
Oh, there we go.
He is one of the first vampires that we know of with fangs.
Okay.
Okay.
And he often feels remorse for what his condition makes him do, like, i.e., drink blood. He's kind of a villain, but he's also one of the most important early anti-heroes. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about Taylor Swift. I just want to be clear. An anti-hero, she did not invent the anti-hero. The anti-hero is not a villain. It's someone who has some negative traits, or they could be villainous, but they're ultimately a sympathetic character on the side of good, even if they
Right.
have questionable means to their ends.
Sure.
Yeah.
Villains, on the other hand, are just bad. They're
Right.
just
Right.
bad to the bone. Ooh, it's windy here. That door just
Whoa.
slammed.
Hey. Do you have a spirit box there? Or?
I don't, but I do know that this house has a few hauntings. Usually the cat's the only one anybody ever sees.
Okay.
So, but I'm cool with
Interesting.
it. Yeah,
Okay. Fair enough.
yeah, I'm good with that. Maybe they're interested in the vampire stories,
I mean,
Maybe.
it's really riveting. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff in there.
right?
Yeah.
So, the plot for Varney. Oh, by the way, when I was practicing this, I chatted with a friend, and she's like, it's good that you mentioned Taylor Swift because I think she's a vampire, and that's the secret to her longevity and not aging, and perhaps being able to compel people to continue to love her music through their whole lives. And I was like,
Huh.
maybe.
I mean, you
That's
never know.
interesting.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a theory.
she's
We could go with it.
wildly popular for a very long time.
Absolutely.
So sure.
Yeah.
Paul Rudd's another one.
Yeah, right? Maybe they're all
He
vampires.
never ages.
He really doesn't.
He doesn't.
So I was trying to figure out a way to distill the plot from Varney the vampire. So the story begins when Varney attacks a young woman named Flora Bannerworth in her sleep, and he leaves the 2 marks on her neck. This is the first time for that, by the way. So her family tries to figure out the mystery, and Varney's like all over the place. And sometimes he's helping them, sometimes he's threatening them. There are mob chases and sea voyages and crypts and duels and escapes and disguises, and he fakes his death multiple times. Eventually, he dies by throwing himself into Mount Vesuvius.
Wow.
That'll get
Yeah.
the job done.
Yeah, I can't think of a more dramatic closure.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's just like, I'm going to end it all.
Yeah,
Jump right
it's
into
just
Mount
like that.
Vesuvius.
He was the first major vampire character in the English language with interior emotions. Varney talks about his feelings, his regret, and he is full of existential suffering, which is a thing we
Where-
see with vampires again and again.
Yes.
The things that we
Edward
still
Cullen.
associate with vampires that came from Varney, the bites on the neck, the hypnotic influence to compel victims, regeneration, like being able to regenerate himself,
Mhm.
and the Gothic settings. This is the
Yes.
beginning of the true Gothic vampire setting. We have mansions and like foggy nights and like dark passageways.
Absolutely.
And without Varney, Dracula would have probably been a very different story.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that
I
makes
think it's
sense.
sad that Varney's not popular anymore. Like nobody knows this,
I know.
Nobody
Well,
knows
and
this story.
and the Gothic part of the whole, I mean, between Bram Stoker and I mean, any lore that you know of, especially now, the Gothic, not only just architecture, but everything behind it, it is so synonymous with
The
vampiric.
cape and
Right, the
everything.
cape, and then, like, if you ever go, and I was an art major for a while, so I had to learn this stuff, but if you ever look at
Yes.
some of the Gothic period, you look at these really interesting sweeping structures with, like, beasts and hands and faces and stuff that,
Yes.
that's very demonstrative and very, I mean, you can really tell.
Gargoyles
Yeah, like
on buildings.
right, gargoyles and stuff, so you're right, it's sad because that is really the iconography behind, this whole story, for me anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, some of the experts who I read about who said that Varney's not popular anymore because it was a serial, because it was a series, and it was really long. And if you put it all in one book, it's like this big, and that modern
Yeah.
audiences simply won't sit and read something that long.
That's a shame.
It's true. We don't unless we're forced
No.
to for school or something.
Mhm.
Right.
And then there's the fact that there are contradicting origin stories for Varney. It begins with him being an ordinary man, and during the English Civil War, he betrays his son to save himself.
Oh.
And then he's, of course, racked with guilt because his son dies, and so he commits suicide. And this is considered such a grave sin that he is condemned to becoming a vampire, to being undead. He didn't choose it, right? It's
Right.
the vampire's curse. But then there's the other story that gets published in the serial. I guess they forgot, and they're like, "Shit, we're gonna do something different now."
Yeah, right.
They
It's a
said that,
multiverse thing.
yeah, right. It goes into like the scientific experiment gone wrong kind of thing. And they say that Varney was subjected in his depression after his son's death. He didn't commit suicide. He was subjected to alchemical experiments meant to cure his negative emotions. And the experiments backfired, and he accidentally became a vampire instead of getting over his depression.
Sure, blame it on alchemy.
Yeah, right? And that's a real medical backfire right there.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I
Boy.
meant to cure your depression, but instead you became a vampire. Sorry.
Yeah, like
Oops.
I created an Nosferatu patient 0.
Yeah, right.
Jeez. Oh man.
So, but it is interesting that this whole science as villain is part of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein too.
Yes, it is.
It's
Yeah.
not it's
Absolutely.
not unknown in the monster category.
Mhm.
My favorite quote that I read in the little snippets I read of Varney was this one: the curse, oh misery, thou art indeed my portion. So it just seems so melodramatic and like deeply feeling. I really liked that.
That is really good.
That is cool.
Yep.
Almost Shakespearean in a way.
Yeah.
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 So our next vampire is a woman. From 1872, she predates Dracula by more than 2 decades. Her name is Carmilla. The author is Sheridan Le Fanu. And this female vampire is elegant, and very influential and sensual and tragic, of course. She is, how do I say? Well, it's more of that fear of a powerful feminine character.
Gotcha.
So I put the reading part at the beginning on this one. Sometimes, after an hour of apathy, my strange and beautiful companion would take my hand and hold it with a fond pressure. You are mine, you shall be mine, and you and I are one forever. I shuddered at her words. It was as if I had been wooed with a passion that kindled my very dreams, yet I could not resist it, nor deny the strange fascination she inspired in me. So you might have already caught on that this is a story about two women. It is narrated by Laura, who is a lovely young woman living in a remote Austrian castle with her widowed father. A mysterious carriage accident near their home brings Carmilla into their care. Carmilla and Laura form a very intense friendship, and it even crosses into Laura's dreams. It's emotional, and it definitely bends those romantic boundaries, which at that time in history would have been a lot. Shocking.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So in the meantime, of course, a mysterious illness is spreading through the countryside, and local girls are found dead. They're just like dropping like flies, right? Laura herself begins wasting away, and she is just having these more and more terrifying dreams. And of course, we slowly get the idea reading it of who Carmilla is and what she is.
Right.
Her affection for Laura becomes more overtly romantic and not just friendly. And Victorian readers would have recognized the taboo of this lesbian love affair.
Right.
It would have been considered deviant at the time. Now, modern readers often see Carmilla as sort of like a queer foundational work in the pantheon of writing, and not just Gothic, not just vampire, but also in that category too. And it acknowledges that there are, ways of feeling attraction outside of the heterosexual norm. And of course, this is something the Victorians would have thought was very dangerous.
Sure.
Carmilla's
Yeah.
character resists control, doesn't listen to men. She moves where she wants, and she chooses her prey freely. Laura, by contrast, is a good Victorian daughter. She is obedient, passive, and sort of like sweet and dreamy. This reflects the cultural anxiety they had about women who would not fit into a traditional role. And during the attacks by Carmilla on Laura, Laura doesn't know if she's awake or dreaming. And she starts to take on these like fever dreams, thinking that it's not really happening. Maybe it's really happening. But Carmilla bites over the heart, not on the neck. So Carmilla is very pale. She's beautiful. She sleeps in a tomb and avoids daylight. And these are all things that we see later.
Yep.
And there's a lot of Anne Rice tones in that.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know, you-
absolutely.
Thinking that too.
I
Yeah,
am
you get a lot of that.
100% sure Anne Rice was familiar with that story.
Because, obviously, and I know we'll probably get to it, but the whole Lestat and, that relationship obviously had a lot of homosexual overtones and different things of that nature. So,
Influenced by
right, and influence. So I'm
Yeah.
like, every time he says, I'm like, this totally sounds like Anne Rice.
It
yes.
does.
Yes. But many, many hundreds of years before.
Right. Yeah, no kidding.
So, actually, maybe only, let me think. Only 100 years before, actually. What was the
Still a
year
long
on that?
time.
Hang on. Let me double
That
check.
is 1872.
1872. And then, Lestat was the 1970s. So, only 100 years before, but wildly different time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So, when we get into Dracula, we're going to say for sure that Stoker took all of these earlier ideas and sort of made them one. He was the first person to like sort of structure his narrative very tightly and modernize this myth. And he added technology, something that we did not see in any of these previous ones, and urban settings, making it more today.
Yes.
Dracula himself combines the folklore monster with the, aristocrat into like a fully realized beast. And so, with no further ado, let's talk about Bram Stoker, the man
Yay.
behind the count.
Right.
So he was born on November 8th in 1847 in, I'm going to say this wrong, Clontarf, a suburb of Dublin. So
Yep.
he was a Scorpio, which makes sense because he's, he wrote Dracula.
Right.
His full name was Abraham Stoker, so he went by Bram.
Mm,
And
Cool.
until around the age of 7, he was really weak and sickly and mostly
Mhm.
confined to his bed with some unspecified illness. He was very fragile during his childhood, and the medical condition is unknown. It might have been rickets, which is a vitamin D deficiency. It could have
Mhm.
been something like bronchitis or asthma. It could have been something neurological. The truth is, we'll never know.
Mhm.
Okay.
A lot of people speculate, but whatever reason, he was a sick kid, spent most of his childhood in bed, couldn't play.
Hmm.
So,
That's
Yeah.
rough. That's a rough what.
Bad.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
But his early life was defined by this physical weakness and these long periods of isolation. And it gave him a lot of time to think. And
Mhm.
a lot of experts credit this time with him being able to create these like fantastic worlds in his mind.
Yeah, you see that a lot with some of these really long books and different things like Tolkien and stuff like that. I think
Mm-hmm.
even he had medical issues, so that he had all that time to kind of develop and really just kind of architect this incredibly huge planet,
Your mind has to occupy itself.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, he has some of the themes in his life that you see in Dracula. Blood is a symbol of life, that
Mhm.
liminal space between life and undeath, and illness and wasting away. Now, he does become a robust adult, and he eventually gets to Trinity College in Dublin. He excels in athletics. He becomes a rower and a weightlifter. This is like a huge transformation, right? And he later becomes a civil servant in Dublin Castle. He works as a clerk. And then he gets into theater. He starts writing theater reviews for the Dublin newspaper and then moves to London in 1878. This is a transformative year because that's when he starts working at the Lyceum Theater.
I thought it's Lyceum. I'm not sure
Lyceum, I
though.
think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Theater. He becomes the business manager for the renowned actor Henry Irving, and he gets married that year.
Wow.
So he works as the manager for the theater for 27 years. And many scholars believe that Dracula is based on Henry Irving.
Okay.
Henry Irving and Stoker are really close. Many scholars also believe their relationship was not just friendly, that it could have possibly been romantic, but we have no actual evidence or writing to say that that is true.
Hmm.
So, Stoker had some amazing contemporaries, Oscar Wilde, Mark Twain, Tennyson. He becomes very well connected. He exchanges letters with Walt Whitman.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah, and then he also hires a woman named Pamela Coleman Smith to do black and white drawings for his book, The Lair of the White Worm. You should know that from tarot. She illustrates
That's
the
it.
Rider-Waite tarot deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
okay.
all of these people are people in his life, right?
Man, talk about being in the right place at the right.
No, right?
Seriously.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Later in his life, he becomes a lecturer, essayist, and newspaper critic. He talks about arts, literature, and being Irish. He has written several nonfiction works as well. Now, he marries in 1878 a woman named Florence Balcombe. She was a noted beauty and was previously courted by Oscar Wilde, but that didn't work out. I mean, anyway. Their marriage is described, Bram and Florence's marriage is described as distant, especially as time goes by. They have one son. His name is Irving. He's named after Henry Irving, of course.
Interesting.
And
Yeah, that's interesting.
he becomes a doctor and spends his later years preserving his father's literary legacy.
Hmm.
So though Dracula is his most important work, Stoker wrote 12 other novels, tons of short stories. And sadly, after Irving's death, Henry Irving, the actor, in 1905, Stoker's whole life kind of takes a dive. He financially isn't doing as well. That was his whole deal, right? And then his health declines and he passes in 1912. At that point, Dracula is no longer popular. It has not yet become the cultural phenomenon that we think of today.
Interesting.
He dies in London. He was only 64 years old. The official cause is listed as exhaustion.
Hmm.
I'm like, yikes, that's scary because
I mean, I've been
I
pretty
get pretty
tired,
tired.
but I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, we just went on a very, very long paranormal investigation, and I felt pretty tired.
Yeah, you got to
To
watch
think of
out
how
for that
mu-
exhaustion. So
Yeah, no
experts
kidding.
think that he probably died from multiple strokes and or syphilis. But
Oh,
nobody
okay.
knows for sure. Remember, syphilis was a problem back then.
For sure. Yeah.
He is buried in London. So it took him 7 years to write and research Dracula. It is his master lifetime work. And he had a lot of really interesting inspirations for this book. We already talked about like Varney and Carmilla and the
Mhm.
Eastern European Revenant stories, but also, of course, Vlad the Impaler.
Yes.
This was a real 15th century prince, and he
It
was
sure
famous for
was.
his very brutal methods of punishment, impalement especially, and his fierce defense against the Ottoman invasion. His nickname, of course, was Dracula, meaning son of the dragon or devil.
Mhm.
And there we have Count Dracula's name.
Yep.
The original
Yeah.
title of the book was The Undead, Dracula's, and he changed it to Dracula, which is way better, of course,
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
right? Way
Yeah.
better.
And I'm thinking about, and I know this is me Hollywoodizing it, but even in the Gary Oldman version
Yes,
of
this is a good one.
right, the very beginning, you see just how violent his depiction of Vlad the Impaler was. You kind of see, granted, it's obviously taken a ton of Hollywood license, but you see just how brutal this guy
Oh yeah,
is.
if you've ever read stories about it, it's horrifying.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
There are lots of documentaries out there about Vlad the Impaler. And
Yeah.
Mhm.
I did watch one in preparation for this, and I was just like, whoa.
Yeah, it's hard to
Yeah,
to
it's
read
it's
or
very
watch.
difficult. Yes.
Yeah.
So there was also a writer named Emily Gerard who wrote The Land Beyond the Forest. And this was a nonfiction travel memoir about Transylvania. It sounds like a super obscure book even then. It
Right.
talks about Transylvanian culture, folklore, and superstition, and is written by a Scottish woman.
Hey,
At
how
that
about that?
time, it was the only English language source offering insight into Transylvania.
Interesting.
Yep. It has folk beliefs about the dead returning from the grave, improper burials, staking, burning, using garlic to deter vampires, and restless spirits. Sound like a good inspiration?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Is that
maybe
the first of using garlic? Was that
That
the
I
first
could find, yes.
source? Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, wasn't Van Helsing supposedly? I thought he was Scottish, wasn't? No, he
No,
wasn't.
no, he's Dutch.
No.
Oh, that's Dutch,
No.
right? Okay,
He's Dutch.
I was thinking something else. Yeah,
Dutch people are super practical. It's the
right.
perfect nationality for the character.
Yeah, you're right. And you would think Van. I mean, come on.
I always wondered how the garlic came in, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Now you
That was
know.
the first.
Garlic
Yeah,
is delicious, by the way.
it is.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I wish that my stomach liked it a little bit more.
Oh no. Oh.
Oh well, you know how it goes. You eat too much of stuff, and anyway, I tend to get a little bit lodged right in this general vicinity. So it is what it is.
Well, Dracula was rooted in real belief systems. It was not all made up by Bram Stoker. I think that makes it, anytime there's like these pieces of truth in a fiction, it makes it more believable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the other super interesting thing is that the Dracula book is called epistolary style writing. It's structured as a series of journal entries, letters, and newspaper clippings. It's kind of
Yeah.
like before we had found footage horror, that's what it would
Mhm.
be, right? In a
That's
novel
right.
form.
Gosh, and his name escapes me, but it's when he gets sent to his
Parker.
home. Parker, thank you.
Mhm.
It's when he gets sent to his home and he goes through all that. So you're right. It's all from his perspective
Yeah.
and letters going back. That's right.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
So the
Mhm.
other thing that's really interesting about Dracula is that, timing. It came out in the midst of the tuberculosis crisis. And it was also called consumption, where people would sort of fade away. They would be coughing up blood, and it just sort of felt like they were drained of life. And this is a big part of the success of Dracula in its own time. Consumption was pulmonary tuberculosis,
Right.
and it was a real disease, and it was not understood in this time period.
Mhm.
But people felt that the illness sort of consumed someone from the inside out. It included extreme weight loss. Victims would be gaunt, skeletal, almost ghost-like. Pale skin, persistent coughing, often coughing up blood, sunken eyes, pink cheeks, and red lips, as well as progressive weakness and fatigue, including a sensitivity to light. So people with tuberculosis looked almost ethereal and faded, and like they were like a living ghost.
Right.
Hmm.
How
It would
awful.
happen to whole groups of families,
Mhm.
and from there, people assumed that it was somehow linked to vampires.
Yeah, I mean, that logic checks out.
Yeah, I didn't know about the sensitivity to light.
No, I didn't either.
That's a new.
Yeah, I wonder if that's just due to the fact that,
You feel miserable. You don't like bright lights.
no,
Well, yeah, if I have a headache,
that's-
I don't want any light either.
Yeah, exactly.
I
So-
forgot what that neurological pathway is, but I think that tuberculosis obviously has some impact to that. So
Yeah, I knew about the others, but that's the first time I've
Yeah.
heard that about the sensitivity to light.
So I do have a historic case for this from Rhode Island in 1892, and it is said that this was studied by Bram Stoker as well. Mercy Brown was a 19-year-old girl who died of tuberculosis in Exeter, Rhode Island. Her mother and sister had already died, and her brother Edwin was sick. But they believed that Mercy was to blame and that she was rising from the grave each night to drain Edwin's blood and life force.
Jeez.
So, you know what they did, right?
well, of course.
They
Mhm.
exhumed
know.
her body. They found it unnaturally well preserved. Now, remember, it was also very cold at the time she died.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Frozen ground. Yeah.
Right?
it'll-
Yep. Her
Yeah.
heart still contained liquid blood, and this was proof to them that she was undead. So they burned her heart and her liver, and they mixed the ashes with water, and they gave it to her brother Edwin as a cure for his illness.
Mm.
Edwin does pass away.
Oh, yeah.
Edwin does die. Yeah.
Well, why the liver, though? I mean, the heart, okay, I get it, but why the liver?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm not
That's
sure
just
why
the-
anybody would have thought that was a good cure, but I mean, corpse medicine was a real thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I knew
Well-
that. I just. Anyway.
So yes, the whole tuberculosis thing sort of became romanticized during the Victorian era, especially. Women with tuberculosis were seen as tragically beautiful. They would be thin and pale and delicate and doomed, and that's just so Gothic and wondrous to those folks. Consumptive women were kind of portrayed as angelic and sensual.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, that's not my thing, but
I'm sure they didn't feel that way.
yeah, I'm sure
Good
they
lord.
were literally wasting away, and last thing
Exactly.
they felt was sexy. But
Yeah.
it kind of becomes like a beauty standard.
Right.
So
And it's even seen kind of traditionally now with some of the stereotypical goth
Well-
people of being very gaunt.
Well, even the models and the runway models, I mean, they've got to basically not eat.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And-
now there have been some
Yeah.
improvements in runway fashion,
Neat.
but
yes.
I mean,
So-
sometimes they're picking more athletic looking women now, which is
Right.
great. It's
Thank
a
Yeah.
you.
huge improvement.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
But for so long.
For so long,
I mean,
they were very
yeah.
skinny, very
Yeah.
unhealthy.
Yes. Unhealthy.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Wow.
So you have to remember too, like we didn't really have germ theory yet at that time.
Mhm.
So it just seemed logical that it would be vampires causing consumption or tuberculosis.
Sure.
So it doesn't necessarily make sense.
No.
So I want to touch also on another very real part of Dracula, and that is that it is a huge exploration of sexuality and gender.
Mhm.
And the people have questioned over time if Stoker himself was bisexual, which would not have been socially acceptable in his lifetime. But there are definitely innuendos within the book about both Jonathan Harker and Renfield. And then we
Right.
have the two women. And you know I love
Yeah.
talking about women in history. So let's talk briefly about Lucy and Mina.
Okay.
So in the book, Lucy is the very sexually open woman. She's proposed to by 3 men and says, "Oh, I want to marry them all." And I was like, "No, you don't." But No, you don't really want that. But you see in the story that she becomes the one who's punished, whereas
Right.
Mina
Right.
is the ideal Victorian woman. She is smart but chaste and moral, and she always stays true to Jonathan Harker. So they're very different ideals of womanhood, and Lucy is kind of considered the modern woman, whereas Mina is, Van Helsing actually describes her as having a woman's heart and a man's brain, and this is
Huh.
considered a more desirable Victorian woman.
Right.
Let's see. Lucy's very flirtatious. And then as soon as she becomes a vampire, she becomes even more erotic. Like she is described as growing more voluptuous. And Mina, on the other hand, never actually becomes a vampire and is cured. So this is kind of like a moral victory in the story.
Right. Yeah.
But-
Punishment versus
Yep.
And I thought they captured it really, really well in the Gary Oldman,
They do.
that Lucy. That was amazing.
They do.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, again, I hate Hollywoodizing it, but Johnny Depp's daughter did a fantastic job as Mina, too. I thought that was,
Oh, and the Nosferatu.
Nosferatu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And maybe we'll talk about it, but I thought her depiction of it was a little bit more, I don't know, kind of tragic than, the Winona Ryder part. But
Yeah.
anyway, I
Yeah.
really did enjoy that. Yeah.
So the other major theme to mention in Dracula is science versus superstition, which I did already talk about. So there's technology in this novel, which we don't see in any previous novel. Typewriters, phonographs, trains, telegrams. Is kind of like Dracula's the monster of the past, and he's sort of hell-bent on stopping progress, right? And technology
Interesting.
is part of what Van Helsing uses to defeat him. So Professor Van Helsing is Dutch. He's Dutch. And he's not just a vampire hunter. Like I said, I feel like the vampire hunter is a whole different story. But Van Helsing is sort of like the science versus faith, reason versus folklore kind of character here. And he's ridiculously educated. In this book, he's a doctor of medicine, a philosopher, a metaphysician, and a lawyer. I don't know how he had
Lawyer?
time to do anything in his life but study,
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah, no kidding.
right?
Wow.
It's a lot. It's a lot. But
Man.
he's the first one who diagnoses Lucy as a vampire, and he accepts that this is a supernatural cause to her illness. He believes that true science must be open to mystery and to the unseen and what's not understood. And right, and he's the one who eventually stakes Lucy's body, right?
Right. Yeah.
He kind of organizes the pursuit of Dracula, and he protects Mina in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important because he legitimizes the supernatural to the skeptical male characters that kind of become his like vampire hunting posse.
Right.
Mm.
And I think he grounds a lot of stuff in the
He
story.
does.
Yeah.
He
Right.
does. There's a lot of great Van Helsing like fan fictions as well.
Sure.
And the whole, like I said, the whole vampire hunter category becomes huge because of Van Helsing. I
Right.
mean, who doesn't love Hugh Jackman as Van Helsing?
Yeah, I mean,
right?
yeah, I know some family members of yours that are quite fond of him.
The love. Love Hugh Jackman.
Hugh
my mother.
Jackman as Van Helsing is like
Yeah,
the stuff of dreams, right?
Yes.
So,
Her mom.
My mother. Yep.
oh, excellent.
Yep.
That's very good. Kudos, Mom. So, the legacy of Dracula, the most important part of this whole thing. Dracula did not create the vampire, obviously, but
Right.
this character gave the vampire immortality in print, on screen, in culture. He revolutionized the vampire myth in profound ways and kind of reshaped the folklore into a template that still sticks even today. It was like a reimagined vampire for the modern times. He went from being a peasant monster to an aristocratic predator, and we still do that today. We have the vampire as the metaphor for sex and power.
Mhm.
Before, he was like a metaphor for disease and plague.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite an
but-
upgrade.
Yeah. Yes. Quite an upgrade. And now he's like the alluring, dangerous, intimate monster, and not the one that's like a bloated zombie.
Yeah, bloated corpse.
Dracula has a narrative blueprint. Before, these were like oral traditions and all over the place, or like the serial fiction. The story doesn't even stay the same. Now there's a blueprint. This is the vampire story. Check.
Right.
Mhm.
He creates basically the same vampire rule book that we still use. They drink human blood. They have to sleep in their native earth. Remember the Demeter, the ship? Like,
Right.
Yeah.
got to have
Yeah.
the boxes of dirt.
Right.
He could shapeshift. He could turn into a bat or a mist.
Mhm.
Human strength and speed. Think Edward Cullen.
Mhm.
He can hypnotize you. He has mesmeric powers to sort of like control people. Garlic. Repelled
Sure.
by crucifixes and holy items. Must be invited into the house.
Hmm.
Here we are at the Lost Boys again. You're the man of the
Yes, I was
house,
just
and I'm
thinking
not
about
coming
that.
in until you invite me.
That's right.
Yep. Mhm.
Well, he got him
Um,
there.
The fear of sunlight. Now, in the actual Dracula book, he's only weakened and injured by sunlight. He doesn't killed by it.
Right.
The stake through the heart becomes like a permanent piece of this lore. Beheading as well. The creation of more vampires by biting.
Wow.
And the further he gets from home, the less powerful he is.
Huh.
He also starts
Okay.
the no reflection in the mirrors. This is because at that time in history, mirrors were made of, who knows?
Oh, I feel like we just talked about this.
So lead. Yeah.
No,
No.
pure silver.
Oh, we talked about
Oh,
that
yeah, we
recently
did.
with the
Pure
werewolf.
silver.
That's
Yeah,
right.
So
that's right.
silver was a metal that could be used to fight the supernatural at that time.
I feel like
And
I just got an F.
that nowadays mirrors are made of plastic, so I guess vampires show
Right.
up in them. But
Yeah.
yes, and also the control over animals is the final piece of this new template. So, you know, how bats and wolves and things will obey Dracula, that's all from Bram Stoker.
Yep. Yeah.
So all of this is thanks to this one book.
It's amazing. The
This sort of, like I
standard.
said, consolidates everything together.
Everything.
Right. And now it's the gold standard by which
Absolutely.
everything.
Everything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. So I wanted to also, because it's always important to me to explore other parts of the world. Vampires are global. They did not
Yeah.
just come from Europe. There are vampiric stories and creatures everywhere on Earth. Literally every continent that's had people has vampire or vampiric stories. So I'll
That's
just hit a
interesting.
few because this could also be another like whole episode on its own. So in China, there is the hopping vampire. This is a stiff reanimated corpse that hops towards a victim to absorb its chi or life force.
Interesting.
Yes, they are created by improper burial. They have greenish skin, very long fingernails, and they're very rigid. That's why they have to hop. They can't like just
Huh.
run.
Huh.
They're in rigor mortis, I guess.
Yeah, no kidding.
You can repel them with Taoist talismans, bells, mirrors, or sticky rice, which is good to know.
Sticky rice.
Sticky rice.
Yep.
Was that
Yep.
bind them up because they hop it? That's interesting.
Their feet get stuck to
Yeah,
the
right.
ground.
It's like a Spider-Man web. I'm stupid. Please continue.
So in India, they have the Vatala, which is a sort of like ghoulish spirit that will go into a corpse and inhabit it, and then will hang bat-like upside down from a tree in the cemetery.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it feeds on people's fear and confusion. I think there are some of those in America right now. I'm kidding.
Mhm.
Just a couple. Just a couple.
They're often linked to sorcery. Apparently, that's how you get them. And they also like riddles. So they will punish you if you get the riddle wrong.
Hmm.
They're like trolls
Yeah,
Kind
no
of
kidding.
trollish.
under the bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's
it's
a little
interesting that
creepy.
they're mostly in cemeteries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I would go other places because there's lots of places people are confused. I'd like hang out
Right.
at a university or something.
Right. on a Thursday night or a
Yeah,
Friday
right?
night. Yeah, your toxicology in the blood though might be a little high, but that's okay.
It's all good. I mean, it's a
It's all good.
supernatural creature,
Yeah, he's not gonna die from it,
right?
you know. Talk about contact
But the
high.
corpse hanging upside, that's
Yeah,
yeah.
that is kind of wild though.
Right?
Yeah.
So in the Philippines, they have this especially terrifying thing called, I'm going to say this wrong, so forgive me in advance, the manananggal. Like I said,
Okay.
maybe wrong, but this is a female creature who separates her upper and lower body at night and sprouts bat wings to fly and hunt for her favorite food, which is the blood of fetuses or pregnant women.
Ugh.
Wow.
Right?
Separates her body?
Yes, she takes her upper and lower bodies apart and leaves her legs so that she can fly around and hunt for fetuses and pregnant women to feed on their blood.
Congratulations, you have given me nightmare fuel.
Wow.
I didn't come up with this.
Something like that?
So
There's
wild.
a similar creature in Malaysia and Indonesia called the leak, and her head detaches from her body, but her intestines stay attached to the head.
To her head?
Yes. And she then flies through the night and also feeds on pregnant women and newborns. So,
What are they smoking over there?
My gosh.
I'm not sure, but these stories go back really far in history. Like
Yeah.
they're pre-Islam. Like they're really old.
Yeah. I mean, I know I'm making light of it, but I'm sure this was a very big thing during the evolution of the stories and all these different things and what they've seen, but holy crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Detaching, first of all, just the detaching and flying with the top half of your body. But I can just imagine a head rolling around with like a large intestine hanging out the side of it.
Yeah, that's creepy.
Looks like the worst freaking spider or octopus I could ever think of.
It is legitimately terrifying. I'm
Yeah.
laughing, but it is awful sounding.
Oh yeah, that's a nightmare.
I did not send you any art of that. You're welcome.
I appreciate that.
Oh, we don't want that.
Yeah, and I will not try to find artwork on it. So
Yep.
yeah, we'll just move right along.
Yep. So next we're going to move to the Andes Mountains in South America, where we have the Pishtaco. This is a white ghoulish figure who feeds on body fat.
Ooh. That one can.
Do you happen to have his number by any chance?
Oh,
I could use that. It's funny that his name's close to taco because I think that's where I've got most of this from. So
so they believe that this creature originated around the time that colonists arrived, and they kind of symbolize fear of this other new type of person coming into the area, and yeah, they somehow feed on body fat from the indigenous
it's
people.
interesting.
Huh.
Well,
So,
okay.
yeah, in Brazil
This
we
is
have
interesting.
the chupador. Not to be confused with the chupacabra. This is a werewolf that is a bloodsucker.
Okay.
Hmm.
So yeah, and then also there were a few other small tales I found throughout the Amazon basin of bat demons that could also drink the blood of villagers too.
Huh.
So yeah, and then Africa, I did find a creature called, I might say this wrong, and again I apologize, from Ghana, called the Azanbasam. This is a forest-dwelling creature that has iron teeth and hooks on its feet that hangs from trees and attacks at night, sucking blood from people who are asleep.
That's very bat-like.
It
It's
is.
pretty.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. So all across the world, and of course there is Chupacabra from Puerto Rico. But
Right,
that's a
yeah.
news story. That's from like the 1990s.
Yeah.
But it is a vampiric goat sucker.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So as you can see, the vampire story is from everywhere.
Wild.
Everybody has something vampiric in their culture, in their folklore, in their background. It's not just Dracula, but
Yeah.
flying heads
you look at-
and bats and yeah, people.
Nice callback.
Yeah.
No, and what's crazy about it is that we're talking about over a long period of time, different cultures all over the place, but yet so much of the same things kind of ring true throughout the entire.
Yeah. Well, something
story.
started.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah,
course.
I mean, it does make you think about, obviously you look at the factuals, with the science and everything, and then you look at the lore, but to think somewhere in the middle there is the reality of it. So there had to have been people that displayed these things, which is why, all these different lores come about. But
Yeah.
that's just wild to think that somewhere in the middle there is a reality.
Right.
Well,
absolutely.
there are certain mental illnesses there where people kind of go out of their head and they will attack people and
Oh yeah,
try to eat them. So
it's true.
it's probably where it came from.
Wild.
It's
Mhm.
interesting though, because we don't really slot vampires in with cannibals. We just
Yeah.
don't. You
Well,
know?
aside from the masticating crazy man,
Right.
the really the only thing they're really trying to get from us, I guess, is blood.
Right.
Yeah.
So whereas otherwise, like a cannibal is actually eating the flesh and consuming the flesh, not just the blood.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I don't know which part scares me more, that fact or the fact that I actually know the difference between the two.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, there's that.
Very interesting history, though.
It is.
So I only have a few more things to hit, and we'll cruise right through these because I think that you're gonna think some of this ending stuff is really extra fun.
Cool.
I wanted to make a list of the most notable vampires in literature, but I had to include film because, in addition to Dracula and Carmilla and Varney that we've already discussed, Bela Lugosi gave an
Mm.
iconic performance as
Yes.
Dracula in 1931.
Yes, he did.
I thought it was definitely noteworthy. But right before that, of course, was Count Orlok and Nosferatu in 1922. He was not as sexy as Dracula by a long shot. He was kind of like ghoulish and he had like the long fingers and he was more like the plague-carrying vampire that we saw from the older stories.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think at this point, the vampires really become more cinematic than literary. There's definitely still books, but even when I was researching this, I hadn't read them. I had not even heard of them, but I had heard of the film vampires.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it became that they were the monster that dominated movies. And when movies were more accessible than books to many people because they were cheaper and you didn't have to know how to read. And I mean, of course, many people know how to read now, but historically that wasn't true.
Sure.
So our next name is Hammer Films, which is a British film company. And they create monster movies. Theirs are a little later than the Universal monster movies. They're in the 1950s and 70s. And they recreate Dracula with Christopher Lee. And they make it bloodier, more violent, and sexier. So
I remember those, yeah.
they recreate also like Frankenstein and the Mummy, a couple of others too. They're kind of gritty, and the audiences were a little shocked when they came out.
Yeah. I remember the Christopher Lee one. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a little more visceral than the movies we've seen before that.
It is a bit more bloody and a bit more gratuitous for sure. I'm just trying to remember all the. I haven't seen that ages, but
yeah, it's been a minute for me too.
Yeah, in fact, I hadn't even thought about it till you said it. And I'm like, that's right, you did play that. And then I'm like, oh yeah.
So then in 1975 we have Salem's Lot by Stephen King.
Yes,
and King
scared
kind of
the crap out
it's
of
a
me.
good one. He kind of returns us to like the classic vampire theme, where an ancient evil infects like a small Maine town. His vampires are feral, they are a plague, and they're kind of a fresh take for people who don't know those older stories.
Right.
The following year, we get Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. This is the beginning of the Vampire Chronicles. And we have Lestat de Liancourt and Louis Pontelac, two very different characters that become classic vampires.
Yes.
One is deeply emotional, and the other is flamboyant and charming, and a bit narcissistic, maybe. But they are definitely iconic in the vampire pantheon. So next I chose, I did skip The Lost Boys, though I probably shouldn't have.
That's okay.
It's one of my favorite movies too. But I did pick Drusilla and Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 1997. This has actually been transferred into a novel, believe it or not, though it started as a TV show. But they kind of bring like a punk feeling into vampire lore.
Right.
And I liked that they sort of reshaped the vampire as tragic, and they still bring it into a new generation. Speaking of tragic, I also chose Eli from Let the Right One In. This book was written in 2004. It also became a movie. It was written by John Lindquist, and Eli is a child vampire. A child vampire alone, not like the one in the Anne Rice book, but Eli kind of like makes it by theirself. And their story is really sad, and they are lonely, and they really crave connection.
That is
I
very. That's a really sad tale
It's
too.
very sad.
Yeah.
If you watch the film or read the book, it is heart-wrenching, this rendition
Hmm.
of the
Huh.
vampire. So I chose Celine from Underworld to 2003 next.
Yep.
This has also been adapted into novels, but she's this vampire warrior, and she sort of represents that female autonomy that we talked about earlier. That's why I
She
liked her.
was Kate Beckinsale made her a straight badass. The whole thing was
Yes, I have to
amazing.
agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I did, of course, have to pick the Cullens from the Twilight books.
There you go, Bev.
They kind of brought vampires into the light and the goodness of the world.
Uh-huh.
Um, they were the romantic Gothic vampires, of course.
Mhm.
Yep.
They said they were vegetarians, even though they ate animals. They just didn't eat people. And there's
Yeah.
this whole like romance and danger to them. A lot of people critique these books as not well written. They weren't meant for adults. They were originally they were young adult
For
novels.
kid. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
they were
Mhm.
not meant for adults. And then all these adult people are like, these aren't serious books. Like, well, they weren't for you.
Right.
But okay, do your thing.
Right.
And I also really liked, I don't know if you have seen City of Bones or read The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare, but Simon
Uh-huh.
Lewis, a very reluctant vampire who kind of retains a human moral code and really embodies like the chosen family kind of narrative.
Mhm.
It is also young adult, but it's very modern and dark at the same time, which I really liked. And so I added Simon to my list. If you
Okay.
haven't seen City of Bones, you should definitely check it out.
Okay.
No. Yeah, we haven't.
Yeah.
And so, what about vampires in America?
Hmm.
Could there be real vampires here? Scientists say no, that vampires can't exist. But at this point, I want to stop and mention this is a fantastic book. I looked at a lot of books during this research. National Geographic put this book out. It's called Vampire Forensics.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
it's written by Mark Collins Jenkins. I am not trying to sell this because I get money. I legitimately am recommending it as a great nonfiction read about the history of vampires and how it all fits together.
That's cool.
I only cover a
Awesome.
fraction of this tonight. And this doesn't cover everything, but
Okay.
it's so good. I highly recommend it. And you can find it on thrift books too.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So the answer is, are there real vampires in America? Yes. There are folks that live in vampire subculture in America today. There are
Mhm.
three main varieties. The sanguinarians, they claim to require small amounts of human blood for their health and energy. Psychic vampires, like energy vampires, who absorb
Uh-huh.
people's energy or influence or emotions. And I feel like everybody's experienced someone like that.
Yes.
And then you're like, check.
Yes.
Yes.
And then, of
Know a
course, there are
couple.
the lifestyle vampires, people who adopt like the fashion and the aesthetic, but they don't like want your blood or energy.
Right.
Okay.
So there are vampire communities that I read about in New Orleans, of course, New York, of
Mhm.
course, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Austin, Denver, Philadelphia is an up and coming place, as well as Buffalo.
Huh.
And apparently in New Orleans, there are vampire social hierarchies. There is the New
Really?
Orleans Vampire Association. And
Wow.
Atlanta also has the Atlanta Vampire Alliance. So
Hmm.
yeah, those are real things.
Well, I mean, it's a social construct, so of course there's going to be hierarchy. It's just you always see that for all kinds of other things. So why not? A
Mhm.
society with
Right.
vampires. It's just interesting to put that together.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be clear that these people don't believe themselves to be undead,
Right.
but they are humans with vampire traits or needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was a real vampire murder back in 1996. A teenager from
I
Kentucky
remember that.
believed. You remember this story?
Yes, I remember it
Teenager
well.
from Kentucky named Rod Farrell believed that he
Mhm.
was a 500-year-old vampire named Visago. And he
Yep.
led a group of goth teens in what became known as the Vampire Clan. And then in 1996, he murders the parents of one of his friends in Florida with a crowbar. He claimed it was part of a vampiric ritual and they had to drink the blood as well as each other. He was, of course, sentenced to life without parole.
Mhm.
Mm.
So on
Yeah,
the
and he's
go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna
Logan.
say he when you see kind of the old footage of him when he's getting in between like courts and stuff, you look at him, you're just like, there is something behind those eyes. It
Yeah.
is a very well, of course, everybody's easy to say it's a very disturbed person there, but
Well, yeah,
but
slightly.
it's just it's amazing when you look at him and he has got that aura of him that well, you just have to see it, and our listeners will probably for sure look it up. But
Yeah,
there was definitely something with that guy.
Yeah. Yeah,
creepy.
he was you can find art on that, but yes.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know that I'll put it in the episode because I definitely don't want to highlight somebody that's a known felon like that,
Yeah, of course. But yeah, it's
but
out
he's
there.
very yeah, it's out there. Yeah, do your own looking on that one. Let the Google search engines come back on you for that one.
So on the lighter side of all of that, there are people who do vampire role playing. And there
Mhm.
are nightclubs with vampire themes in New York and San Francisco. And then, of course, there are the vampire balls. So these are huge galas. And the most famous one, of course, is the Endless Night Vampire Ball in New Orleans. It happens at the House of Blues, which sounds like great fun.
Yeah.
This year's is on November 1st, and it's in the French Quarter, of course. But
Mhm.
it's been described as Venetian masquerade meets the vampire court. So I
Cool.
was like, that sounds like
That's
fun.
actually
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you get to wear one of those like, the masquerade masks like that, but they're all like
They change their theme every year.
really?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. I just got this image of like putting one of those masquerade things
Oh,
on
I'm
with
sure
like,
they do.
I'm sure it's New
vampiric and stuff.
Orleans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
absolutely. But
Yeah.
of course, you can find vampire balls everywhere. Of course, Salem, Massachusetts has them, and there's one I found in Rochester, New York, that's happening in June. So they're out there, and if anybody listening wants to dress up like a vampire and do some vampire role playing, Eventbrite. Eventbrite has tons. You can just go
Huh.
into Eventbrite and look for a vampire ball, and you'll find one.
It'd be interesting
Probably
to go to
within
one of those.
driving distance of you.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool,
It
actually.
is really
Mhm.
cool.
Mhm.
I wouldn't mind trying that once. Just be like, "Hey, yeah, I went to a vampire ball."
It would be fun. It would be fun to dress up
Yeah.
as a vampire and
Sure.
put on a mask and go dancing and to see all the
Yeah.
costumes. I think that would probably be one of the best parts of the entire
Oh,
experience.
Oh, yeah,
for
absolutely.
sure.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, we go to balls for other stupid things. Why couldn't we go for something cool like that, you know?
Get a
Right?
cape.
Oh, yeah, give me a cape and I'll totally play up the tragic,
I don't know how we're gonna make you pale, though.
hey,
That may
look,
be
there's paints out
kinda
there
hard.
and other things like that. I'm sure there had to be like a Latinx or, a dark skin. Well, we just noticed there's all kinds of stuff all over the world. I could have been one of those.
Absolutely. He can be an
Yeah.
international vampire.
That's right. I mean, look, it is what it is. Just deal with it.
Yeah.
That's so crazy.
So my
Yeah.
final things to share. Dracula has never gone out of print. Since it was
Oh.
published, it has never been out of print.
Wow.
His notes and early drafts were recently discovered, and they kind of revealed all the information I shared tonight about how he crafted the vampire myth that we still hold on to today. The vampire story does keep changing, to be sure. It reflects our fears, our fascinations, and our desires of the moment. But thanks to Bram Stoker, the vampire is immortal.
And I'm just
So,
thinking about what you said where it's never been out of print. And
never been out of print.
to think about how long,
Mhm.
my goodness, that is a long freaking
That's how
time.
popular it is.
Yeah,
Huh.
it's it's a classic story for a reason.
Mhm.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Well, Rissa, once again, mind blown.
Yeah.
Just first of all, amazing research. Thank you so much for
Of
taking all
course.
that
My
time.
pleasure. Like I said, it was more than twice this length originally. So this is a rich, rich topic.
Yeah, well, and it needs to be because there is a lot of information in the whole pantheos of the existence of Dracula and all these different things, and I mean, you can't really just cover something like that lightly. So I mean,
Right.
but it's amazing, and again, geez, what a great job! Thank you. We appreciate all that hard work.
Yes, we do.
We would expect nothing less of the Generation X paranormal resident historian,
Historian.
and she is. Yes, she is. Rissa, we know you're always really busy. We know that, but what do you got going on? What can our listeners and our viewers kind of see where you're at and what's going on?
Well, I don't have a ton of stuff online right now, but
Okay.
I am excited to tell you that I was inspired by the werewolf program I did with you. I've developed it into a whole program, and
Cool.
it's going to premiere this May in Hanover, Pennsylvania at the Serpent's Key. So that's exciting. And I'm also presenting another new program in May on the Ouija board.
Cool.
It's a Maryland has a Maryland origin story, and so a museum in Maryland is sponsoring it, and we're putting it out there from beginning to end. So that's been a lot of fun to work on as well.
That is so
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the area, guys, check it out. I mean, first of all, you guys see how she is on the show and in person. I guarantee you, I'm gonna sell you up. I mean, she's gonna be definitely as good. So, no, that's great. But yeah, thanks again. Thank you again for hitting it out of the park. It was a blast. I knew when we'd cover vampires at some point, it would be a good show, and I'm so glad that it was Rissa that brought it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think if it had been me doing the research, it just would have been all about Lost Boys or something like that.
It would have been.
Which is,
I mean, there's
which is
nothing wrong
good.
with
It's
that.
good.
Yeah.
It's a good, gritty vampire movie, and I probably know it by heart.
Oh,
Not
I know
gonna
I do.
lie.
Did you ever see Near Dark?
No, I haven't seen that one.
That's a pretty good one. It's an 80s one. It's got Bill
Okay.
Paxton in it. But yeah, you should check that one out. It's definitely different, but and Vamp too, by the way. But well, Rissa, again, thank you so much for coming on. Again, we love having you and can't wait to see you come back.
I look forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rissa.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And now I get to have nightmares about a head with intestines running out behind it.
Yeah, those are pretty creepy. And some of these others, obviously, diseases and stuff like that, not understanding what happens after death led to most of these things.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That one, like, there's a few, I'm like, where would this come from?
I don't know, but now
It's just weird. Like,
I don't know that I could ever unthink it.
Or people just created stories to scare other people, and that's how it guaranteed that's how it happened.
I'm sure there was definitely a part of that for sure. But no, it was a great episode. And, I knew there was a lot of history behind it. Obviously, it's been covered and covered and covered in so many different genres and all kinds of different venues. But I guess I'd never really gotten that deep into it, knowing, the history prior to Bram Stoker.
Yeah.
You always hear about that because, as Rissa said, now this is the gold standard.
It is, yeah.
So it makes sense. It's just it's interesting. I never quite thought about it so much where it went so far back, but
Yeah, I'm interested in going back and reading some of those older versions
yeah. I mean,
and see how they compare.
it just, to me, it's very reminiscent of a vampire, which makes sense, or not vampire, of zombies. It was because the whole show's about vampires.
Yeah, and there was one thing I picked up on when she's talking about the one that they ate the dirt, right?
Yeah.
And covered themselves and
Yeah.
and I thought back to like The Walking Dead. I remember like the show.
Yeah.
And to blend in with them to get through like big groups of them, what would they do? They would cover themselves,
the blood and
the blood, so they smelled like them and they didn't notice. And I was like, ooh, that like
interesting tie-in.
So I guarantee there's crossover there.
I guarantee it. But
yeah, it's interesting. But I don't know. The vampire is very interesting. I like the newer version where they're not so terrible. It's just because I don't like gross stuff.
Sure.
Like I don't like horror movies per se. I like scary movies, but I don't like horror movies because usually that entails all this nastiness, like gross decapitation and yeah. Like the vampire movies are fine. But like, all the like Freddy and
the slasher film.
I don't like that type of stuff. So when
I
they're like really gross, I'm not into that stuff.
Sure, But not every one of them are slasher vampire.
Well, no, they're not.
They're out there, believe me.
I prefer the vampire that's torn about being a bad thing and trying to do the good, thing. And I like the architecture and the that type of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not really into the nasty.
You like Brad Pitt's version.
Oh yeah. Who's not gonna like Brad Pitt's version?
Yeah, I know. Well, honestly, guys, for us, I mean, for me, for sure, it's always going to be like, Lost Boys or, one of those.
But I do like the new version, the TV show that we started watching.
Oh,
that's set in New Orleans. And it's like the new Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah, well, it is.
TV
Technically, it's an Anne Rice, so it is Interview with the Vampire.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
it's like the newer version. And I actually really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, that one has been very unexpectedly.
Because they can go more in depth when it's a TV show, I think.
Yeah, well, it's episodic, so they can build on things.
Exactly.
Sure. Guys, tell us what you think.
Yeah, what do you think? What is your favorite type of vampire?
Who's your vampire?
While the main show is catching some rays and recharging its EMF meters, we've got something brewing in the heat. That's right. Logan's rolling out tinfoil and tan lines, a limited summer series diving into UFO sightings, weird phenomena, and everything that makes summer just a little more unexplained. So grab your sunscreen, your bug spray, and maybe a crucifix, because the paranormal never takes a vacation, and neither do we. We'll be back before you can say, I swear that was a shadow person at the barbecue. Stay weird and stay tuned.